Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar hosted by the American Public Human Services Association, also known as APHSA, in partnership with RedMane Technology. Today's webinar topic is the intersection between data and trauma-informed practice, a critical link for vulnerable families. If we can go to the next slide. So my name is Francesca Robinson. I'm an instructional designer with APHSA, and I'd love to just take a moment to share a little bit about who we are and the work we're proud to do alongside of our members. So at APHSA, we represent human services agencies at the state, county, and city levels from across the country. We're a bipartisan organization dedicated to building common ground and generating practical solutions that work for people and communities. Next slide, please. And so we aim to advance the well-being of individuals, families, and communities through three core channels: influencing modern approaches to sound policy, building the capacity of public agencies, and connecting leaders to accelerate learning and generate practical solutions. And our vision is one of thriving communities built on human potential. Next slide, please. And while we're on the topic of staying connected, I just want to make sure everyone is aware of the APHSA conferences that we're hosting in 2026 in Arlington, Virginia, New Orleans, Louisiana, Spokane, Washington, and Salt Lake City, Utah. You can visit the events page at aphsa.org throughout the year to learn more about these conferences, including registration dates, keynote speakers, and session information. And then last slide for me. So APHSA also offers a career center, which is a dedicated job board and talent marketplace, really designed specifically to connect professionals with career opportunities across the human services sector. And it really serves as a valuable resource for individuals seeking new roles, advancing their career, or exploring opportunities within the sector. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And then lastly, before I turn it over to our moderator, just a couple of housekeeping items. So this webinar is being recorded and it'll be circulated shortly after the event to anyone who registered. During the webinar, we are requesting that you put all questions for our presenters in the Q&A panel. The normal chat feature, as you probably have noticed, has been disabled for this session, so you'll definitely want to take advantage of that Q&A feature. And our panelists will try to type responses to as many as possible live, but we'll also have time at the end to answer questions. So with all of that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Cheryl Hartshorn.
Thank you so much, Francesca. If we could just move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Great. So thank you very much. And thank all of you for taking time today to join us and hear from our amazing speakers and a topic that's near and dear to our heart as we kind of think about the intersection between data and trauma-informed practice. I'm Cheryl Hartshorn. I'm the general manager at RedMane Technology. I've been with RedMane for 14 years now, and prior to that, worked as a social worker with a focus on child protection for 16 years. So this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. At RedMane, we've been in business for 25 years. We're a problem-solving company. We focused on human services, particularly on child welfare, and it's really been our privilege to be involved with a number of different jurisdictions as they've gone through transformational journeys, and we've really supported them through case management, analytics, and AI solutions. We're thrilled to be here today, and I'm so honored to have this group of incredible panelists, folks that we've worked with, folks that are part of our community, to share with you their experiences and expertise as well. So we've got Felicia Davis Blakely here, Deanna Cadot, Allison Lowry, and we're especially honored that Adriana has joined us. She's a special guest and she's connected to Primo Center, and you're going to hear a little bit more about her story as we go forward. Let's move on to the next slide. And so as we really think about data really being that essential element for trauma-informed practice, we really think about what impact that can have. And so really acknowledging that early decisions have lifelong impacts on children and families. And so we want to make sure that we can use data to support us to make timely, proportionate, and least intrusive decisions, that it brings objectivity, to complex situation and the children and families and in the organizations and systems that we work in. There are so many things that happen that really being able to have an objective look at things is important. We also want to make sure that clients, children and families that we work with and our organizations and the people that work within the organizations have the right support at the right time. And of course, as we learn more and as practice evolves, we really understand the value of being more preventative and proactive than being reactive to situations. And data helps us with that and drives some better outcomes. Let's move to the next slide. And so really today, we really have the opportunity to hear from a really significant community-based agency, to think about prevention services and then mandated policy and decision makers and how that really wraps around children and families that we work with. And we really have the honor of hearing Adriana's story as well as we work through this. So let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to introduce the Primo Center and introduce Felicia Davis Blakely to you. They really are an extraordinary organization in Chicago. Felicia will talk a little bit more eloquently about Primo Center and the good work that they do and how they're really thinking about being engineers and pioneers in trauma-informed practice and really thinking about that data as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Felicia. Before I do, I'm going to introduce you properly to Felicia. So could you go to the next slide? And so Felicia is the CEO of the Primo Center. It is a Chicago-based organization, as I spoke about. But Felicia's been with the Primo Center now for about 3 years. It's coming up on 3 years. But prior to that, she was the president and the CEO of the Chicago Foundation for Women. She led a $45 million fundraising campaign and launched the Shecovery initiative that advances equality through collective action. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Felicia.
Cheryl, thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to join. And also thanks to RedMane and APHSA for facilitating this really important discussion. So Primo Center was founded in 1977 with just 11 beds and a rectory. And today, the center is Chicago's largest provider of services for families experiencing homelessness. On a daily basis. It's about our mission is to empowering families to become independent, responsible, and productive members of their communities. And we do that through utilizing high fidelity wraparound services for a holistic and trauma-informed approach. And we really do partner with our families to build their resilience and long-term stability. And just a note about the aspen leaf, which is part of our logo. The aspen leaf stands for resilience, which is really what we embody and try to stand for every day in our operations. Next slide. So we have a question that I want to ask everyone before we begin. Have you or someone you have known experienced homelessness or child welfare involvement? And you can please take a moment to answer the polling questions. This is important. We're trying to collect data and we want to understand everyone's experiences. So take a moment to answer yes or no. Next slide. So I want to start by really grounding us in the simple truth that families don't experience systems and pieces. They experience them all at once. So housing instability, child welfare, healthcare, education, income support, these are not really separate lanes for families. It really is kind of like a comprehensive thing that comes for the families. And yet our data systems are often siloed. So in Chicago, CPS stands for Chicago Public Schools, and our Child Protective Services is called DFSS, right? DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services. So we have data from schools, data from housing providers, data from DCFS and maybe welfare child, and all kinds of systems. But they're siloed, but they shape decisions before anyone has a chance to understand the full context of a family's life. Trauma-informed practice asks us how to slow down, listen, and respond with care. But without data, we may miss patterns. Without trauma awareness, data can actually reinforce harm. And this intersection is where real change happens. Next slide. When we say trauma-informed data, we're not talking about more dashboards or more compliance reporting because heaven knows we have enough of that. We're talking about how the data is really used. Trauma-informed data is timely. It shows up when staff can act. It's interpreted with context, not judgment, and it helps teams ask better questions instead of jumping to conclusions. All of our work is really grounded in family, the head of a household, what they want for their family and what those outcomes are. And it's not our self-imposition of what we think is best for that family. Most importantly, it's used to adjust services in real time, not 6 months later, because that's too long for the families that are already on the cusp. Not after a negative outcome has already happened or occurred. And that's where data becomes a tool for care. Next slide. I want to talk about a real life example from the Primo Center. So in a situation with a family, data surfaced early warning signs. I mean, when residents come to us, our clients come to us, we do a comprehensive intake. But the reality is sometimes it takes a while for families to trust, and sometimes the data does come in pieces. But in this situation, data surface early warning signs, changes in engagement, increased stress indicators, and things that might traditionally be flagged as non-compliance. And usually in a non-trauma informed environment, it's a punitive approach. But instead of reacting punitively, staff paused to ask why. And this is where lived experience really matters. Understanding trauma helped interpret the data correctly, and the response shifted from something that could have been enforcement or punitive, as I said, to really one around support. The result wasn't just better outcomes, it was preserved trust. And that trust is often the most fragile assets that families bring into our systems. That trust is often the thing that gets taken first or damaged first, because the systems, every system that families interact with have their own challenges. And sometimes by the time family comes to us, they've been through so many of those interactions, they actually have just lost trust. And it takes a while for us to kind of work with them to rebuild that trust, or at least to have them trust us enough so that we can work with them collaboratively. Next slide. And I'll close with what this means beyond any single organization. And it's that data should support professional judgment, not override it. Trauma-informed practice requires feedback loops that allow teams to learn and adjust quickly. And lived experience doesn't dilute data. It actually strengthens the integrity of that data. And from a policy perspective, we have to ask whether, our funding and reporting structures, and heaven knows there's a lot of reporting requirements, there are a lot of compliance requirements. And from an organization standpoint, there are a lot of different, I's to dot and T's to cross with a lot of different systems. And we have to do the work of not letting our clients, our residents feel that, right? To feel the work that has to be done kind of like behind the systems. So from a policy perspective, whether our funding or reporting structures allow agencies to learn in real time, or whether they unintentionally reward delay or rigidity, is something that we should tackle with. The goal isn't better data for its own sake. The goal is better decisions for families so that the data supports those decisions for our families. And when data and informed practice work together, really families are no longer managed by systems, they are supported by those systems. Next slide. So I am so deeply honored that Adriana can join us today. This is a remarkable young woman who has amazing resilience, amazing skill set that she came to Primo Center with. We're just honored that we were able to help her move on and support her in her future growth. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Adriana so you can hear from her directly.
Thank you so much, Felicia. I appreciate that. My name is Adriana Gathens, and I was at the time a resident that was living inside the Primo Center. So pretty much I can say this, my experience in the Primo Center was an overall journey. I was just getting out of divorce. I had 2 kids and I was just trying to figure this thing out. And on top of that, I was just starting all over, starting my life all over again and just figuring out my identity. And then on top of that, I was dealing with homelessness. So within that, it was just a lot of different things and experiences that I was going through at that same time, and trying to figure out, okay, what is the next steps I'm going to do to be able to provide for my children, be able to give them the stability that they need. So um, I had called 311, and then I had gotten in contact with Salvation Army, and they had put me on the list, and then they told me that I got accepted by the Primo Center. I had no idea um, of what the Primo Center was. I'm from Chicago, but I've been gone for so long. There's so many different things that I didn't know about. So me coming back home and just getting accepted through them, and then when I went in, I did my intake, and I was just pretty much embarrassed. I didn't know if I was a good mom. I didn't know what was going on as far as like, okay, am I going the right direction? Is this something for me to even be inside? Because it was times where I was thinking, maybe I'm just not fit to be in here. Maybe this is for somebody who needs to be in here. But actually, I'm glad I was inside there. Um, I was inside the Primo Center for 6 months. I went in March 16th, and I left August 29th. My experience outside of what I was going through, what I love the most is Primo allowed our kids to still live their lives without feeling ostracized and without feeling like they were, trapped inside something. They still did activities. They still did everyday things like we would normally do with our kids if we wasn't in a shelter. um, and the stability and the support as far as just talking to case managers, telling goals, plans, etc. Um, they really held you accountable to make sure, like, okay, this is your goal, this is where we need to be. Okay, what are the steps you are doing to accomplish that goal? So around August 29th, I had found out about the apartments called Thrive. These are new apartments where I would say they're income based, but not necessarily. It's market rent. So I found out about them, and I applied, and I got accepted. And these apartments I've heard so much great things about because these were built ground up. I was seeing it every day, just going back and forth to work and going to Primo. So once I did that, and I got accepted, then they had pay my security deposit, and then also I was in a furniture voucher, and I got my apartment fully furnished, and ever since then I've been going to school and just you know, going up, doing the things that I was planning on doing once I said I was going to leave Primo. So without Primo, honestly speaking, I don't know where I'd be. And still to this day, they still support me in areas where if I need anything or if they come across any resources of anything, they are always there. And I just greatly appreciate them because honestly speaking, I'm still astonished of where I'm at today right now. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Adriana. It's wonderful to hear your story, and congratulations on the journey that you've been through. I know that Primo Center has been a great support to you, but I also know that it takes a lot of hard work for you to get to where you are. So congratulations, and what a great role model you are for your daughters, and for our community. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It means a lot for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the next slide. And so I'm going to introduce to you Deanna Cadot. Deanna is a manager of services with Métis Child and Family Services Authority in Canada. She lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and is a member of the Red River Métis, or is a citizen of Red River Métis. She has spent over 18 years of her life really advancing Métis Child and Family Services and really thinking about quality. She is a data wonk, if I could use that term, as well as being an incredible and empathetic member of the community, and her work and her leadership. We certainly appreciate. We've gotten to know Deanna very well over the last number of years, and she's going to tell you a little bit about their journey to really own their own data and really think about how do they make good decisions for the children and families that they work with, and in conjunction with them and for their staff. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Deanna, to talk a little bit about the work you do. I think we have another polling question though first. So I'll turn it over to you, Deanna, and you can take it away.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I hope I live up to that intro. That was an excellent introduction. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm so glad to be here with everyone. And yes, we do have a polling question coming up, but I just am so glad to be here. And I hope that we can kind of show that even though we're from different cities and different countries, that this data conversation is really impactful and important, and it actually follows us everywhere. And it's important information to collect, and it means something, and it matters. So next slide, let's get the polling question out of the way. So poll 2, have any of you worked with youth that are at risk of being homeless when they are no longer in foster care? And next slide for me, please. I think that was enough time. So we were actually formed out of something called the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry. Basically, what happened is there was a large proportion of Indigenous people involved in child welfare and the justice system. And so the greatest minds met together, and it was decided that cultural services needed to be provided to Indigenous people, and that the current system wasn't supporting that. And so through years and years and years of work, Manitoba was given 3 of the 4 authorities to be focused on Indigenous people and to be serviced by their own people. So in 2003, the Métis Authority was mandated into existence. And from there, we have created 2 agencies that actually cover our entire province, and we serve Métis people, regardless of where they are in the province. And many sub-offices to cover all that area. Next slide, please. So throughout the years, so when the authorities were created, there was a pre-existing provincial system. So already, when we were created, it was already, I would say about a good 5, 6, 7 years old. And so in 2014, there was another inquiry done where basically everyone decided that the provincial system needed to be upgraded. And it never came to fruition. And so in 2019, we met with some folks that we had met before when the province was having discussions about having a provincial case management system. And we went, okay, we're going ahead anyway, because this actually has to happen. We need a new system. We need a system that supports our cultural services. We need something that can be changed. Because that was one of our bigger problems, is that old system was really hard to change. And it was also really hard to make it unique to each of our cultural services that we provided, our cultural practices, and the things that were important to us to know and to collect. And it just, we also don't have, and I know this is going to not be good news, but we do not have a prevention-based child welfare system here in Manitoba. It is very much protection-based. And so our trauma-informed involvement with data is halfway through. It's like, how do we prevent further harm coming to a family? And so we really needed to make a system that was unique to that, because long-term outcomes were our focus, not where are you now, even though that is what we assess when they come to us. It's how do we track making that better? And so next slide, please. So one of our areas of focus have been caregivers. So currently in the provincial system, it's very hard to really track whether or not people are family. whether or not we've maintained connections, whether or not there's support family members involved. And so when our media reports on caregivers, which they call foster homes, most people assume they are stranger based, and that is not our truth. And so it was also important to us to ensure that we're tracking the safety of homes, whether they are kin or whether they are stranger based homes, because children's safety is paramount regardless. And so in having our own system, we actually have a stronger connection to our quality assurance of ensuring background checks and safety assessments and environmental scans and all those good things that keep children safe. Next slide, please. And I kind of already went into here, but why is that important? Well, based on studies in and around my province and our capital city, 80% of Indigenous people are people who are living without homes currently in our city. And 50% of those unhoused people are have had child welfare involvement. So that means that when they age out of care, they have nowhere to go. And that was a statistic that we just cannot live with. So it became paramount for us to find family, to connect family, to create supports. And so in being able to track that and support that, those are signs of success for us, for those long-term outcomes. We don't want homelessness to be a factor because you've come into contact with our system. And what's not on this slide, but one of the other things that we also track is when we rescind court orders, because we want to know that we've had a successful reunification when the system said it wasn't likely. Because family matters, family creates better outcomes, and that is so absolutely important to us. Next slide, please. So what we learned about supporting family is that, if we can keep children with family members, or at least have them linked to who they're living with and have consistent contact, which we track, we do see that kids that age out of care or get to leave care and return home do end up with those better outcomes. They don't necessarily come back to the system. They have less barriers with education. And that's really one of our goals. And we get to see the evolution of the family over time. We have, family time planning. And so we get to see, where are the supports needed? How is this going? Who else can we bring in? And all of this is tracked in our system so that we're ensuring that no matter what, the child is supported for a better chance at a brighter future with less barriers. And our goal, I know someone, Felicia, I think, brought up earlier that, all these systems are working in silos. And the fantastic thing is, with the software we're using, there is hope in a future where there's an interface or where we can share information. So we're not working in those silos, and we are actually wrapping around families. And I very much look forward to that day. So thank you very much. That'd be next slide.
Thank you, Gianna. Appreciate that. Can we move to the next slide? Great. We certainly have really been honored to work with the Métis Child and Family Services Authority in Manitoba and with Deanna for a large number of years. We implemented her system during COVID, and it actually had we learned to use Zoom and Teams really well, really focusing on what was important for their organization from a cultural perspective and for integrating kind of who they were and what their data meant to them. In the solution that we came up with, and Deanna's been such a great steward of that as we've evolved over the years. So thank you very much for sharing that journey with us, Deanna, and how that matters to you. I think you mentioned some statistics on homeless folks in Winnipeg, and I think it's 80% of the people that are homeless are Indigenous. Is that right?
Yes, it's 80% Indigenous, and 50% of that same group had involvement with child welfare.
So thank you for clarifying that, and it's certainly a startling statistic. So there's lots of opportunity for us to use data to improve those outcomes for sure. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison Lowry now. She's one of our executive leaders at RedMane, and she's been with RedMane now for a few months. We were really lucky to have her come and share her experience and expertise with us at RedMane. She comes to us most recently as a senior advisor for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Children's Bureau, and has been previously a legal aid attorney, and really brings some really great perspective on the work that that folks are doing and the importance of data as we kind of think about shaping policy and what interventions look like. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next slide, please. All right, so polling question number 3. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you believed something to be true that did not bear out in the face of data? Yes or no? I think that is something that we all experience over time for sure. All right, get started. Next slide. So we're going to tie everything together in thinking about data, technology, and trauma-informed policy. Next slide, please. So there's been a quiet but really important shift in how we think about data in human services. As we all know, we already collect extensive data across human service systems and measure outcomes for a variety of issues. But what changes practice isn't collecting more data, it's using it differently, especially when that's informed by the insight of community providers that they gain through their daily work with families, as we've heard. So data helps see families' experiences, not just outcomes. And then we begin to understand how systems actually operate, the timing of referrals, the impact of the quality of handoffs, and the gaps between eligibility and access. And it's those moments that really shape how families experience system involvement over time. So when we reframe what data can do and how we use it, it becomes a tool for understanding rather than just for monitoring and for compliance. It really surfaces where systems unintentionally add stress, where they can delay support or fragment care. And that shift is then central to trauma-informed policy. It's redirecting attention from individual behavior to system conditions instead. Next slide, please. So one of the most consequential shifts that data enables is moving us again from seeing events as isolated to moving to looking at patterns, right? So looking only at individual events obscures how system timing access affects families, but longitudinal trauma-informed data can make those cumulative effects visible and then ultimately actionable. So for example, repeat involvement with human service systems might align less with emerging safety threats and more with structural conditions. Was there delayed access to service and resources, housing instability, gaps between referrals and actual support? Technology can surface these patterns clearly enough to challenge longstanding assumptions about families' risk, their compliance, and service effectiveness. And then when these patterns are examined over time, better questions can emerge, right? We can shift focus from whether a single action worked for one family to how system timing, how system access, and how system sequencing shape stability, especially once children are in care and families are involved with human service systems. Policy can then become trauma-informed when it responds to those recurring patterns and system conditions rather than treating each decision or outcome in isolation. Next slide, please. So let's talk about natural language processing. We all know that one of the most underused assets in human services is narrative text, right? That's the voluminous amount of case notes, provider documentation, and referral descriptions. And that's where lived experience is actually recorded. So natural language processing, or NLP, allows us to analyze huge volumes of this written documentation to identify recurring patterns across families, providers, systems, jurisdictions. And so what's powerful here isn't the technology itself, but what it surfaces, right? So looking across thousands, millions of notes even, familiar barriers can come into focus, right? Not families failing to make progress, but perhaps housing wait lists, unavailable services, referral loops that never translate into access. So these are system signals and information that are embedded in everyday practice and embedded into these millions of pages of notes. Deanna mentioned kinship families. Their experiences of stepping in quickly, navigating informal caregiving, struggling sometimes to access supports, and often managing really complex family dynamics. All of those things often appear first in narrative notes long before they show up in structured data and outcomes. The same is true for people who are transitioning out of care. Those challenges with housing, services, and eligibility cliffs often surface first in narrative rather than structured data that only capture sort of the administrative milestones that they have to achieve. We also saw this firsthand in our work at RedMane. One of our state clients set out to improve children's foster care experience. They had sort of clear assumptions about what would be needed to do that. But when we used data and technology to examine their system patterns, it really surfaced additional factors and then brought in a needed layer of objectivity that reshaped how they approached change. Adriana also talked about her children being able to participate in activities while at the Primo Center. And that was a powerful reminder that experience matters at least as much as outcomes. So those moments of normalcy for children, school events, routines, social connection, are often invisible in traditional metrics, but they're critical signs of stability and well-being that data and NLP can help us surface, elevate, and protect. And so when we're thinking about data and technology, NLP can become a form of system listening. It turns frontline and provider insight into evidence that can inform prevention-focused, trauma-informed policy without replacing human judgment. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk a little bit about how data can support the human services workforce, which I think is always important to think about. We can use data to actively reduce trauma for the workforce, not compound it, right? Felicia noted that policy and funding has to support learning, not just reporting and compliance. And similarly, when data is framed as a judgment tool, it drives defensive documentation, risk-averse decisions, burnout. But when it's framed and used as a learning tool, it can do something very different and can surface, again, system strain instead of individual fault or behavior. Learning-oriented data helps leaders see where timelines are unrealistic, where capacity is insufficient, and where service unavailability forces workers into impossible choices, even when their practice is really strong. And so that shift matters because it validates what workers already experience and then redirects accountability towards system design. So this is thinking about trauma-informed data use in action, right? Creating shared understanding, supporting collective problem solving across agencies and providers, and then also making the work more sustainable for the people who are doing it every single day. Next slide, please. So the policy environment increasingly is supporting using data and technology for learning, coordination, and better trauma-informed service delivery, not just reporting and compliance. There's growing momentum toward interoperability, modular system design, and targeted pilots that allow systems to connect across agencies and community partners and better reflect how services operate in practice. And that shift really creates a moment where there's real opportunity to use existing data upstream, really to reduce burden on families, strengthen coordination, and surface system friction earlier. So the call to action, I think, really sits at that nexus, right? We can use this moment to move upstream and use data for learning, use technology to reduce system friction, and then develop trauma-informed policy to elevate lived experience, especially with the insights of families, community providers, and the workforce. When all of these move together in concert, we can start to improve how families experience human service systems, we can support families more effectively, and we can make the work sustainable for the people who bring humanity to the human services system. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Allison. That was really, really helpful. Going to spend a little bit of time really talking about getting our panelists together to talk about some questions that kind of linger in our minds. And so I just invite our panelists to join us again. The first, and could you just go to the next slide as well? That'd be great. And so some of our shared learnings are things that we think about. So the first question I have, and folks can jump in and give your opinion about this. So can we use data to push back on people's perceptions about those that are experiencing homelessness or marginalization? Thoughts?
Cheryl, I can start. This is something that recently happened to me. It happens a lot, but over the holidays, I was at a dinner party and I was sharing what I did with a couple. And the wife and the couple said to me, "Oh, you can tell me why people are really homeless." And I said to her, I said, well, many of our families are dealing with, mental health disorders. And, she goes, no, 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 beyond that, as if that isn't, complex enough and really, traumatic enough in families having to navigate all the systems that we talked about. And I said to her, I said, listen, I just double down with examples because to me, the lived examples of the people that we're serving helps to educate others. And I said, I have a family in shelter now. The head of the household, it's a daughter, really, and she has her kids, but she also has her brothers because their dad killed their mom and then killed himself, right? There was mental health disorders there. There's a lot of trauma there. And it was really important to me to use that like real example. And I gave her a couple of others because I feel that we need to push against this narrative around that somehow that it's just their fault or that they're doing something wrong. And so many of our families, as demonstrated by Adriana, right? Some one little thing may happen to them, but they already have resilience. They just need a little support in that moment. And so, yes, I just had to say that and share that experience.
That's powerful.
May I
Other
please touch on that too?
please, yes, yes.
Um, I think the biggest assumption is a lot of people are homeless because they can't find a job. It's a lot of working homeless people, to be honest with you. You'll be surprised. And I was one of them. So sometimes it's just literally a situation that comes about because I was in a domestic situation when I was married. So I could have went other options as far as probably staying with family members and stuff like that. But honestly speaking, um, what made the most sense to me was actually going into a shelter. At least I know that would be stable because sometimes the issue is when you do stay with family members, then issues can come about. Now you're jumping house to house, and that lacks stability for your children. So at least if you're in a shelter, at least that cuts out all the things as far as stability because you have that stability in the shelter. So that's one of the biggest things. I think that people don't work or they don't want to work, they're lazy. It's a lot of people who actually might be very, close to you that might be on the same thing, making ends meet. So it's nothing as far as nobody don't want to work. It's the economy as well too. That's a big factor as well. It's times are totally different now.
I
I think
appreciate the
that's
perspective,
such an
Adriana. Go ahead, Allison.
I just think it's such an interesting and important point, right? And the problem is that we have assumptions, but then when policy is made based on those faulty assumptions, people suffer and don't get what they need. And so, thinking about using data, and increasingly, I think we know that there are a lot of people who don't have homes who are also working. Um, and but the more we can mine data, the more we can really look and think about this and use technology, use data to approach it objectively. That allows us to then develop better public policy and get more at sort of the root causes that can help people, where they are, depending on what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Deanna, anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. So sorry, I'm trying to kind of get them all together. But yes, absolutely. Like, there's never one thing that's kind of set, like it's the one thing that knocks the rest of the dominoes that are still like already standing, that kind of create these situations that just feel impossible without support. And they can be in so many, like with us too. I mean, again, all of these areas intersect. We have mental health, we have extreme poverty, we have housing issues, good housing issues. Like, yes, people can get homes, but are they safe? And so being able to collect information over time and say, where are we providing service? Because maybe we're providing it in an area that has nothing to do with our organization, but that's where the need is to reunify or keep this family, together, or to relieve some stress so that it's doable. But if we actually then take that information and all of those organizations get together, like we have a very big potential in the future to kind of show each other's work to each other and go, wait, if we all do this together in these areas, I bet you everyone would be doing so much better, because unfortunately, these silos are perpetuating it. And data will allow us one day to have the same conversation. And that's what I love about the potentiality of it.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to jump to a question that's in the question chat right now, because I think it's really timely. So thank you, Mark. Mark had asked about, could we provide some specific examples how data has helped with trauma-informed care, and is the data in current systems? And then you talked about systems being integrated across providers. And so that's kind of a multi-layered. And then you have another question about tools. So let's first talk about how data has helped more specifically with trauma-informed care. And is this data currently available?
So
Felicia,
if
do you
I,
have?
oh,
Oh,
sorry.
that's great.
I
No,
I
go for
apologize. I was going to jump
it.
in. So
Go
in
for
our
it.
province, we have like prescribed assessments that are to be done with families, with children. And so what we do is we've actually embedded them into our software so that we can actually run reports and kind of see where they overlap, or we can clearly define the supports or the systems we need to put in place to support those realities. So I mean, we can't prevent things from happening, but once we know, we can find a clearer path forward so that we're moving them through the system and not keeping them in it. And even one of those can be when we're dealing with children with complex diagnoses and needs. We have an assessment, it's embedded. We can run reports. We can know 3 years in advance that we're going to be going for that service in 3 years if we're still in contact with them, or we're getting the documents and tests done now so that they can be successful and going into that next step of support. And so we are kind of trying to intersect with other organizations where we can with the data we can collect now.
Right.
I'm sure Allison has something to add. I mentioned earlier about data living in silos, and so the system integration piece, Mark, to your question, I think is missing, but would be very, very helpful to have that. And so often when we encounter a family, the only information that we have about them is if they've been in a shelter prior, and the information that's tracked out of that system, like where, length of stay, and that type of thing. But everything else is self-reported, and it takes time for us to really dig into like data around school attendance, data around DV, if there's been any domestic violence in the past, and those types of things. And so ideally, like I firmly believe this with my whole heart, like if we had more integrative systems, we could get to these outcomes better. We could like move, faster. Faster does not mean without care or without caution. It just means that we can say, all right, these are the things that we know, and start to address those things while the other issues kind of present themselves. And I know Allison probably has more to say about this.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And, we have clients who are using systems and the data that they have and that they're collecting just in creative ways to really think about what's happening in with their families by jurisdiction, or more broadly. And so, yes, there can be AI, again, NLP can help with that and really surface the experience of families so that you can then use that to develop policy that is trauma informed and speaks to the needs of families in that moment.
Thanks, Allison. Hopefully that answered your question, Mark. We have another question in the chat that I'll raise. So an attorney for a CPS agency had asked about ways to help social workers confront and manage their own relational trauma around issues, and talked a little bit. Their question speaks about how they've had some social workers have sometimes had some lived experiences, and she is saying she sees it come to work in different ways. Some social workers seem to have heightened expectations because of their lens of experience. I see others rationalizing or excusing things that are legitimate safety issues. Any suggestions? So, Allison, can I turn that to you to start to talk about? And I think Felicia and others have different answers to that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's such an important point, and we think a lot about family trauma, which is so important, but also the trauma, then secondary trauma that workers experience is key, and it leads to burnout and all the things that we all know. So, using data, for example, in ways to support instead of monitoring and really focusing on what somebody did right or wrong, I think is a good way to start that. Um, but it's a tough question. And I think we need to just always keep thinking about different ways to support the workforce, especially, those who are really on the front lines of working with families and who are absorbing families' trauma as well as their own while they're working.
Felicia, thoughts about that?
Uh-oh, is Felicia frozen?
She might be frozen.
Okay.
So we'll let her get unfrozen. And Deanna, do you want to speak to this at all?
Yeah, hopefully this buys Felicia time. So yes, one of those things that we focus on too, like I mean, there's a data thing and then there's a training piece, right? And so for training, yes, vicarious trauma, we take it very seriously. Mental health first aid are trainings that you really can't do without in frontline. And then from a data perspective, and because I kind of feel like that question also said, what do we do about bias? What do we do about what people think they know? And so again, it kind of goes back to the best practices and building assessments around kind of what is the meat and potatoes of the situation? And then how do I narrate around whether this is a strength or a worry or a risk? And then just kind of also teamwork, taking those assessments to your teams and saying, okay, this is how I see supporting this family based on the information I have. And so that's kind of where the humans and the information kind of intersect. And I think it's really important to have that and to also have that camaraderie that they can work together and plan together because we're not here to judge, we're here to mitigate, support, and aim towards success. That's our goal.
I would just add, and certainly on our RedMane website, you can find actually did a webinar a couple of years ago about vicarious traumatization for frontline workers, and this is exactly the concern. And I think really as we think about practice, and as I'm a big proponent of good clinical supervision, and that actually has a significant role in this. So really understanding who the people are that we're supporting to do this really important work, recognizing the impact of doing the work on them, and then really how do we support them then through good clinical supervision as well. Because I think we can expect this. I think, over my probably 10 years as a supervisor, really, and manager, really understanding that everybody comes to this work as people, and we've had experiences that we bring with us. I think about even myself as a worker. I know that I was a much different worker before I had a child than after. And so things that seemed impossible to me before I was a parent, how could somebody possibly shake a baby? And then after I was a parent with a newborn and back at work, I was thinking, good thing this doesn't happen more often. And we need to wrap lots of support around people because it's hard being a parent. And so different things come to you as you come to this work. And so really an important question. So thank you for asking that for sure.
Carol,
Felicia,
may I add one more thing to that?
yeah,
And
for
so,
sure.
and I just reread it and sort of saw that part of the question is really about um, when workers have their own lived experience, that's really impacting how they're doing the work. And I'm curious just to know if other people experience that and how agencies and community providers are thinking about that. So if people even want to put things in the Q&A, I think it's a really interesting question to think about and hope that we can have more conversation about that for sure.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure.
But
I'm sorry, I disappeared for a moment. Now I'm on my phone. Best laid plan.
glad to have you back.
This is a really important issue. We talk about this every day, secondary, tertiary trauma. Our whole team, so it's not just our social workers, our case managers, it's the entire team. We have a number of people on staff who have lived experience to Allison's point. And so they've dealt with similar situations. We have a whole peer recovery team, and this will answer another question, I think, from Beth, Michigan. Adriana is wonderful, but we have a team of people who are employed here who can be a resource, and I'll share my contact information if you want someone on that team to talk with others who are experiencing homelessness. We can certainly connect them. I want to be respectful of Adriana and the work that she's doing with her family and also her dental hygienist training and so forth. But this trauma is really real. So we have done things like, we have a clinician who only works with our teams, to de-escalate, does de-escalation training. She listens to them and works with them on some of the issues and challenges that come up during the work on a regular basis. We, of course, have robust EAP for all of our employees here and make those referrals regularly to make sure that people have time. And then personally, just as a human, I encourage people to take time off. Absolutely use your PTO, take your wellness days, take the time to kind of get away and to decompress.
Absolutely. Mark, you did have a question about for Deanna, the assessment reports, are they done in the system and are they entered into your system?
Yes, so in our province, we do have.
Sorry, I'll read in case I bungled it. Is the assessment report made into your system, and how is it in your system or entered into the system?
Right, great question. So yes, we actually, because they're prescribed because we're still under the provincial child welfare body in my province, so we took all of their prescribed forms that are a must for us to complete, and we've actually embedded them into our software because I don't want to have to open a report 1,000 times, to get information. So by embedding it, it now allows us to run that information as a report, where we can look for trends, we can look for the narratives corresponding to similar assessments, and we can really gauge where and how we're reacting consistently to the same information. Because I mean, like I said, I probably shouldn't have called it meat and potatoes, but the facts of a family situation, and making sure that we are having that story and that narrative included, because data isn't just the number, it's the story it's telling, and then the story that supports what that information is. And so we kind of intersect both. And I know RedMane could kill us with our embedded forms, because we do like to add the narratives of all our embedded forms, but the story is just so important to the main facts, because that helps us with mitigation. And then, sorry, I just got one last thing. Sorry. We also provide something we call a core training. And so we actually train bias in this. And so what we'll do is we'll show an image, or we'll tell a contextual case study story to a group of trainees and say, tell me what you heard here. Tell me how you would write this down. And then we actually let them teach each other within a peer group of how they see things and how they respond, to show that everyone sees everything through a different lens, which I find really helpful.
Right. Thank you very much, Deanna. I really quickly, Mark, you have a question about providers entering entering assessments directly into the system. For the Métis system, their providers don't enter information directly into the system. Their caseworkers do. We have other jurisdictions that we work with where the providers do enter information into the system through a portal, and we're happy to answer any other questions that get into some details separately. So, Mark, feel free to reach out to us at RedMane, and we're happy to do that, or we can have someone reach out to you and follow up with some additional information there for sure. So I think happy to have that conversation further. I'm going to ask us to move on to the next slide because I'm going to wrap us up a little bit. We're right at the top of the hour here. And so a couple of different things. First of all, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate the interest in this. We appreciate that folks are thinking about data and trauma-informed practice. It's so critical to the work that we do and that mission of supporting children and families to be their best and to achieve their best. And as well as the staff that work in these organizations doing really difficult work. And so really appreciate that. I want to thank our panelists. Deanna, thank you for walking this journey with us for all of these years. Of course, my colleague Allison and Felicia for bringing a different perspective to this webinar and discussion. And Adriana, I can't say enough about what an honor it's been to have you join us. Thank you so much. It's very meaningful. And I think probably of all of the panelists that they've heard from today, people will go away thinking about your story and how important it is to the work. So thank you so much. I want to let you know that Primo's annual report is posted on their website. There's a QR code here. I also will tell you they are a nonprofit organization, and Felicia is wonderful at raising funds. But this is also a way that people can consider making this your new favorite charity. And so please scan the QR code. To learn more about RedMane, this code will take you to our website where those other webinars you'll find as well on the website and additional information. Mark will make sure that you get some more detailed information, but if people have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to answer questions or get you to the right folks. Really thrilled to have you join us today. And thank you very much. Thank you for APHSA for the webinar. As was mentioned at the top of the hour, APHSA will distribute both the deck along with the recording of the webinar to the participants, I think next week. Is that correct, Francesca?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Marie. And with that, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us.